I'll let them introduce themselves, but this really was a huge part of the whole weekend, was what you're getting ready to experience. And I just thought, as I was praying about it, the words of Eddie Glaude when he said, America is not unique in her sins, but where America is unique is in the mythology and the theology and the revisionist history that we tell ourselves to try to sanctify and cover up those sins. So a part of what we're doing now is remembering history well so that we can build a better future. And I'm going to get out of the way and most of you have met Lisa, but Chaz is a dear brother, and the two of them are really going to guide us together over the next couple hours. So
thank you, brother.
One thing that we want to start off with is an understanding of the difference between a tour and a pilgrimage. Mm-hmm. That a tour is usually about what you learn at the places you go to, and it's really just about head learning, head knowledge. I will never forget, Randy and Edith Woodley run a ministry called Elohe Farms, and they are about helping us all to reconnect with our indigeneity. And Edith is Eastern Band Shoshone, and the very first pilgrimage I ever went on, they were the guides on the Cherokee Trail of Tears. And what Edith said to us at the beginning of the trail is, she said, my hope is that your knowledge will go from here to here.
Yeah.
By walking the land where things happen, where it happened. We often have a lot of knowledge here, or even no knowledge here, but we're satisfied when we know a date, we know a name. The hope for me, and the hope of pilgrimage, which is what this is, as opposed to a tour, is that it will go from here to here. Pilgrimage is about transformation, and it's about the in-between as much as it is about the stops themselves. So we're going to do a lot of spiritual formation work as well as learning. And this, we're going to begin with the spiritual formation. We're going to begin with a ceremony called libation, to pour libation to the ancestors, because as we evoke them, as we talk about them, the belief within many African cultures is that they actually come and they begin to visit us. They're actually here with us. And we want to pour water for them to say thank you. Say thank you for the ways that you poured out your lives so that we can stand. And so I'm going to actually invite, because at this point, this is such a sacred spot right here. This is the space, this is the land where the auction block was in Philadelphia. And also there's a monument to indigenous people, the indigenous people of the land here as well. And so we want to pour libations for the ancestors to say thank you for what you poured out so that we can stand. And I'm going to invite anyone of African descent, and I'm not talking about 1,000 or 2,000 years ago. I'm talking African American descent in particular, to come and pour the water and to say your thank you on this land. And everyone else is welcome to also honor the people who lost their lives and their family members and their hope and their dreams on this land. Okay? So I'll begin, and then Tracy and anybody else of African descent, if you know that I may not know, that's okay. You come forward and you're welcome to say thank you. So God, we thank you for the way that you stood with our ancestors. You were there in the midst of it. You were on this land. And as Tracy reminded us this morning at the women's breakfast, there is nowhere where you are not. And wherever we go, you are with us. And so even when our ancestors were sold from each other, you went with us to that new place. Even when our ancestors were boarded upon ships and brought to this harbor in order to be sold on this auction block, you stood on the block with them, and you moved with them in the carriage that took them to the plantation further south, or in the earlier days, in the 1700s, to the house down the block where they were going to be enslaved. And so, God, we recognize your faithfulness, and we also thank you, ancestors, for what you did to endure, because your enduring made it possible for us to be here today. And we also recognize all of those who did not endure, who were not able to make it, who either ended their own lives through suicide because they decided they would rather die than to live a slave. Before they were a slave, they'd be buried in their grave. We recognize them. And we say thank you for your courage and your strength. Thank you. Anyone?
Holy One, for ancestors known and unknown, for those named and unnamed, for those whose blood courses still through our veins, for those who resisted in any kind of way they could, for those who submitted so that their progeny might come to be. We give you thanks.
For those who could see the future, knowing that there would be offspring who would live. For those who fought in all the years in between. For those who helped build up this city and build up this country. For those who've loved.
Is there anyone else who'd like to come forward? Ashe.
Ashe. We come through the city, those of us who live in Philadelphia can drive through here all the time and often take for granted the rich history that is around us. We might be running an errand, we might be going somewhere, and we never pause to either read the signs or sort of listen with our hearts. And we thought it'd be fitting to start our pilgrimage here, outside a coffee shop, which has almost always been a coffee shop here too. And so during our pilgrimage, we invite you to use your imaginations if you can, to see a Philadelphia, to see an America that looked a little bit different but looks similar to what it is now. And so this is the Delaware River, and it actually used to come up much further, closer to the city back in the day. We have filled it in with ground, we filled it in with highway as well, but the water used to come much closer. And people don't often think of Philadelphia as a port town, but we were one of the major ports on the East Coast. Boston, New York, Philadelphia, Baltimore, South Carolina, Charleston, South Carolina too. And in these ports, a lot of different products would come in and would go out. Cotton, coffee, tea, other products, human beings as well. And very often when we think about slavery, we think about the South. When we talk about Charleston as a port where my ancestors came in Charleston, that's sort of what we think about. We don't often think about Boston, New York, Philly, and Baltimore. But Philadelphia was also a place where enslaved Africans would come. And they would come down the Delaware River to this port and get off a ship and be inspected right here in the London Coffee House here. And a part of that inspection was to see how hardy, strong, young, healthy individuals we were. And so they would be auctioned off right here. And remember, Philadelphia was much smaller back then. It didn't go all the way over the Schuylkill River, it didn't go all the way north, all the way south. It really was kind of this little area here in what is Old City was Philadelphia. And so if you can, try to imagine human beings taken from their homes, families, kidnapped, stolen, and those who survived the transatlantic journey, and many did not, would be up and down the coast. Many came here. One of the questions we'll hold will be, so what about us? What can we do to repair and fix this?
Yeah, just one piece of like some details about the slave trade that I learned in my research for my family is that in the 1700s, actually in the 1600s, 1619 is the date when the first enslaved people were brought to the shores of Point Comfort, which is we now call Hampton, Virginia. They were not directly from Africa because the ships did not have the technology that was necessary in order to make that long journey from Africa. So what they would do is they would go to Brazil and then the Caribbean, and then come up into the port of Baltimore and then Philadelphia. Later, it wasn't until 1670 that technology was born. And when that technology was born, that year, the first slave ships began to sail directly from Africa. And it was at that point, 1670, especially getting into now the early 1700s, now you start to have an onslaught of enslaved people coming into just directly to America, not having to bypass Brazil or the Caribbean. And when they came, they began to dominate in terms of numbers. There were more black people in Maryland very soon into the early 1700s than there were white people. And as that happened, the slave laws began to clamp down and become much more heinous. So that what we now saw, like if anybody here watched Roots, or Roots, the new Roots a few years back, that's what we normally think of as like the heinousness of slavery, the whipping and all of that was all happening, but it wasn't as legalized, like bred into the law. Well, by the early 1700s it was, and by the 1800s, after the revolution, it just becomes absolutely brutal. And it's because of the domination, the demographic domination of people of African descent. Think about that in terms of right now. Think about that in terms of what's happening now. The craziness that's happening, particularly in one party. And in that party, the clamping down of the law that's happening because of demographic shift.
Ooh. Short walk for the first stop. We're just going to cross the street and let's stand right at the red light right there. We'll talk about our second stop.